The word solstice means sun standing, in Latin. It marks the point when the sun stops at its most northerly or southerly point, relative to the equator. Before reversing direction, the summer solstice, the sun would appear at its highest point in the sky, and is the day with the longest period of daylight. It happens twice a year, once in both the northern and southern hemispheres. The summer solstice in the northern hemisphere occurs around the 21st of June, but it does not always occur on this day. As it all depends on when the sun reaches its northernmost point from the celestial equator, it can happen between the 20th to the 22nd of June. Around this time in areas north of the Arctic Circle, it is possible to witness the sun not set at all, so dubbed land of the midnight sun for this very reason. This occurs because the Earth's rotational axis is tilted. The Earth rotates around an axis inclined at an angle of 23.5 degrees in relation to its orbital plane around the sun. It is this tilt that gives us our seasons. Summer occurs in the hemisphere that is tilted towards the sun, whilst winter falls on the hemisphere that is tilted away from the sun.
Let's look at the size of rain, and how raindrops fall. First, we'll need the sun. When the sun shines on water on the Earth's surface, the heat of the sun warms the water, turning it into an invisible gas called water vapor. This process, the changing of water into a gas, is called evaporation. Because gases are lighter than liquids, water vapor rises up into the sky, and the further you move up and away from the Earth's surface, the colder the temperature gets. So in the sky, the water vapor cools, and changes back into tiny water droplets. This change is called condensation, and is the opposite of evaporation. Clouds are made up of tiny water droplets. So, when condensation occurs in the sky, clouds form and grow. Let's take a closer look. When water droplets bump into one another, they stick together and grow in size. They continue to grow until they are too heavy and fall as rain. They even grow as they bump into one another on their journey from the cloud to the ground, and every single raindrop that reaches the ground is made up of 1 million of the original tiny water droplets. Raindrops fall on the ground surface, or the sun can shine on them, and the whole process happens again. This is called the water cycle, and keeps water moving from the ground to the sky, providing the water needed for plants, animals, and people to survive.
There are two kinds of stress. The first one is little stress, which happens in special circumstances such as exams or other competitions, and can be considered as a motivation to improve performances. You always think about stress as a really bad thing, but it's not. Look on the bright side, and some stress is good for you. Stress can be something that makes you better, but it is a question of how much, how long, and how you interpret or perceive it. The other one is what we usually talk about, caused by poor time management. Good time management is essential if you are to handle a heavy workload without excessive stress. Time management helps you to reduce long-term stress by giving you direction when you have too much work to do. It puts you in control of where you are going and helps you to increase your productivity. By being efficient in your use of time, you should enjoy your current work more, and should find that you're able to maximize the time outside work to relax and enjoy life. Poor time management is a major cause of stress. I'm sure we have all had the feeling that there is too much to do and not enough time. We can start to feel panicky and anxious and lose focus. It's important to note that you can have this feeling even if there's hardly anything to do at all. Hence, to release such stress, people could use a calendar to schedule and find a balance between play and work. Because of the economic model, the newspaper industry has been shrinking drastically from the last 50 years of the 20th century in some states of America. Also, as the economic model changed, newspapers increased the cash flow. However, there are still some newspaper industries losing money because of a decrease in advertising and buyers. They can't find buyers. Only a few newspapers have positive cash flow. Over 100 newspapers with cash flow in red had no money to publish the newspaper every day. Some of them published 3 days per week. Small-sized newspapers only published once a week and had to go online. Some newspapers even disappeared. The staff working in newspaper industry decreased by 30 to 60% or more. Internet was invented by people who were good at programming, and people keep optimizing it for different purposes. So Internet has been growing organically. Internet can achieve many things but has advantages and disadvantages. The email system was designed by graduate students and researchers who know and trust each other. Using email needs trust between the senders and the receivers, as the authentication process was not originally built in this system. Email authentication is a technical solution to proving that an email is not forged. In other words, it provides a way to verify that an email comes from who it claims to be from. Email authentication is most often used to block harmful or fraudulent uses of email such as phishing and spam. In practice, we use the term email authentication to refer to technical standards that make this verification possible. Initially, the email system didn't consider security because there was no suspicion between them at that time, and there was no authentication process built into this system. Today, poems remain an important part of art and culture. We often talk about the knowledge about the literature in poem. Poetry is probably the oldest form of literature, and probably predates the origin of writing itself. The oldest written manuscripts we have are poems, mostly epic poems telling the stories of ancient mythology. The English language in poems and poetries is difficult to understand, often giving readers a feeling of frustration and making it hard for readers to enjoy poetry. This is because poems use literary expressions. Poetry was once written according to fairly strict rules of meter and rhyme, and each culture had its own rules. Some poems incorporate rhyme schemes, with 2 or more lines that end in like-sounding words. We should learn to simply enjoy it, and to know more about literature knowledge. During this period of time, there was a huge surge of activism taking place to reverse this discrimination and injustice. Activists worked together and used nonviolent protest and specific acts of targeted civil disobedience, such as the Montgomery bus boycott and the Greensboro Woolworth sit-ins, in order to bring about change. Much of this organizing and activism took place in the southern part of the United States. However, people from all over the country, of all races and religions, joined activists to proclaim their support and commitment to freedom and equality. For example, on August 28, 1963, 250,000 Americans came to Washington, D.C. for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. They came to have their voices heard and listen to speeches by many civil rights leaders, especially Martin Luther King Jr., who delivered what would become one of the most influential speeches in history. In the aftermath of World War II, African American civil rights efforts were hampered by ideological split. The Southern system of white supremacy was accompanied by the expansion of European and American imperial control over non-white people in Africa and Asia as well as in island countries of the Pacific and Caribbean regions. Like African Americans, most non-white people throughout the world were colonized or economically exploited and denied basic rights, such as the right to vote. A leader can define or clarify goals by issuing a memo or an executive order, an edict or a fatwa or a tweet, by passing a law, barking a command, or presenting an interesting idea in a meeting of colleagues. Leaders can mobilize people's energies in ways that range from subtle, quiet persuasion to the coercive threat or the use of deadly force. Sometimes a charismatic leader such as Martin Luther King Jr. can define goals and mobilize energies through rhetoric and the power of example. We can think of leadership as a spectrum, in terms of both visibility and the power the leader wields. On one end of the spectrum, we have the most visible, authoritative leaders like the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, or a dictator such as Hitler or Gaddafi. At the opposite end of the spectrum is casual, low-key leadership found in countless situations every day around the world, leadership that can make a significant difference to the individuals whose lives are touched by it. Over the centuries, the first kind, the out in front, authoritative leadership has generally been exhibited by men. Some men in positions of great authority, including Nelson Mandela, have chosen a strategy of leading from behind. More often, however, top leaders have been quite visible in their exercise of power. Women, as well as some men, have provided casual, low-key leadership behind the scenes. But this pattern has been changing, as more women have taken up opportunities for visible, authoritative leadership.
A sea breeze is an onshore breeze which develops around the coastlines of sea and even large lakes on warm days. In mid-latitudes, it commonly occurs during the spring and summer. This is when there is a large temperature difference between the sea and adjacent land areas. A sea breeze is a thermally driven circulation, forming due to the fact that the land heats up more quickly than the sea. Water has a higher specific heat capacity and so requires more energy to raise the temperature. As the sun radiates energy at more or less a constant rate, it will take longer for the water to heat up. This means that peak sea surface temperatures aren't reached until early autumn. This differential heating of adjacent land and sea surfaces is the main factor in the formation of sea breezes. A temperature difference of around 3 degrees Celsius is required for sea breeze to start to develop. Other factors that are required for sea breezes to form are light offshore winds at around 3,000 feet. This aids the higher level flow out to sea to get the process started.